We never know where life will lead us or what may hinder us along the way. But while every day can feel like one big question mark, it doesn't have to. With the right insights, strategies, and solutions from Western and Southern Financial Group, together we can look ahead to leave the unknown behind.
I mean, what's pro football focus doing? Last week they had Brady. This week they got Brady.
We're literally doing it differently from everybody else.
As a matter of fact, moving forward from this point on, I will not make reference to PFF.
Ready to get into it?
Yeah.
All right. We're going team by team.
I would be very careful about slinging stone.
Am I going to get sued?
We go legal on this?
I like football season, and all the things that go with it.
Welcome into the PFF NFL podcast. Steve Palazzolo, Sam Monson. We're live on YouTube, breaking down the AFC and NFC North draft halls here, Sam. We got some draft grades and all the like we've been doing the last 3 days.
Yep.
So how long can we drag out the draft? Can we do another week of analysis after this?
Oh, yeah. Three more weeks, easily.
I will say, this is email time, right? This would be the time when we would encourage people to send in emails.
Yes.
Give us show topics, things you would want us to break down. Give us like some really good shows that that's good for SEO and stuff that people would want.
Yeah. Well, also potentially, this offseason, we're still theoretically going 5 days a week. So we got a lot of airtime to fill. So if you had an idea, there's a little bit out there that maybe might make a show, drafting animals, that kind of thing.
Yeah, drafting
animals. We can get a whole show out of stuff now because there's nothing else happening.
We did a periodic table of quarterbacks one off season, right? If you want to do periodic table of running backs.
We should revisit that. Who was the guy that sent that in? I wonder if he's still a listener or if we've turned him off with, idiotic speak over the last couple of years.
Or maybe we just didn't do enough periodic table.
But some guy sent us in, like a legit periodic table of quarterbacks. We could do an entire show on that. Because it's new. Like we've years past, the elements will be updated.
It's true. The quarterbacks may have, evolved into different elements. Mm-hmm. That happened. Anyway, NFL podcast at pff.com, right? No. Yes. Is that the email?
Yes.
Great.
It's also in my it's in my Twitter bio, I think.
Look at you.
The email address to send it to. Yeah, NFL.
Also follow me on Twitter. I've fallen behind.
NFL podcast at pff.com.
At PFF_Steve.
I'm also about due to take the Mel Kiper hairdo off the Twitter avatar.
Oh, yeah, what's off-season time for you?
I don't know. I mean, I've been cycling through hats depending on the season. Like we had the Irish
Kentucky Derby hat.
Shamrock. There you go.
Derby weekend.
There we go.
Go do it.
That's a short-term one, though.
Before we get into the AFC and NFC North, the PFF NFL podcast is sponsored by Western and Southern Financial Group. While you focus on your roster moves, Western and Southern helps advance your money moves. Buying your first home, planning to start a family, wondering how to make your money grow? Well, Western and Southern's playbook of life insurance, investment, and retirement solutions helps you rest assured on game day. Team up to understand needs and address goals with a game plan built just for you. Get started at westernsouthern.com/PFF. For a second there, I thought I said, wondering how to make your family grow. And I thought, no, I'm actually not.
No.
We're
got
full.
That pretty well covered.
We're full right now. But you can make your money grow.
Large family.
westernsouthern.com/PFF. All right, AFC and NFC North. Let's start with the NFC. Chicago Bears. They're first up on the clock here. They picked they had pick 9.
Yes.
Traded down one spot to pick 10 to get Darnell Wright, the tackle out of Tennessee. They stay in the SEC with their second pick. Gervin Dexter, the defensive tackle out of Florida. Tyreek Stevenson, the corner out of Miami, was their second round pick. We saw Zach Pickens, another defensive tackle from the SEC, out of South Carolina in the third. And then early in round 4, Roschon Johnson, the running back out of Texas. Kind of like that pick there. Tyler Scott, the speedy wide receiver out of Cincinnati, who a lot of people had going much higher in this draft.
He ended up being the second one of his own team somehow.
He did, yeah. Trey Turner went ahead of him. Noah Sewell, the linebacker out of Oregon. Terrell Smith, your guy, cornerback out of Minnesota.
Let's go.
Some of the highlights there on day 3 for the Bears. So, overall, Sam, what are your thoughts on the Bears haul?
Overall, didn't love it. So starting question would be, do we factor in the move made weeks ago to trade out of number 1 down to where they ended up starting before they...
In our analysis, yes.
Okay.
My take on the Bears is I think their process has been very sound over the last 2 years. I think a lot of the Bears' team building process, not perfect. Of course, they traded Chase Claypool for Chase Claypool for what ended up being pick 32.
Yeah.
Process-wise, I love the Bears. Now, the part that we're supposed to not be as confident in, the actual player evaluation part of it, that's what I don't like as much. So take that for what it's worth. I like some of the players. I don't love some of the players that they took with their first few picks. I think process-wise, though, the Bears accumulating a ton of picks the last 2 years, the way they've spent in free agency, the way they traded down from 1 and got DJ Moore and the extra picks, and they're set up for next year. I think the Bears as a franchise are making a lot of good moves from a process standpoint. Now, carry on.
Yeah, I mean, so if you factor in that they started off with number 1 overall, they decided they were going to stick with Justin Fields, not pivot to a Bryce Young or whoever else they might have picked at number 1 overall, trade out. They pick up DJ Moore along the way in addition to everything else they got for that move. So if you give them the credit for that, you start from a very high point because I think that's a solid move. That was the correct decision to make. Now you're starting at number 9. You trade down 1 spot with Philadelphia and get the guy you were going to get anyway. You assume that Chicago simply wasn't interested in Jalen Carter, whether they had him off the board, whatever. They're just not picking him, at which point they're happy to move back 1 spot, essentially for free, right? They pick up an extra pick for nothing for a guy that they weren't drafting anyway. They grab Darnell Wright. An interesting decision, right? Paris Johnson Jr. had already gone, but Peter Skoronski was on the board. That was a guy that was being talked about a lot for Chicago. Pre-draft, someone that made sense to fill potentially either spot, whether it's guard or tackle. Instead, they go for Darnell Wright, the Tennessee tackle, who, a kind of monster physical specimen, a guy that absolutely moves people when he gets contact on them. But, as you pointed out before, has one of the worst run blocking profiles we've ever seen from an offensive tackle coming into the NFL. So an interesting pick to grab him that high. Then I think so at that point it becomes, do you love the value they got and do you love the players they got? The next 3 picks are a combination of not liking either of them. Whether either I didn't like the value or I didn't like the player. Tyreek Stevenson is just a corner I did not like in the process and have a lot lower than everybody else. So I'm automatically not going to like that as much as other people.
Yeah, the one thing I did say on draft night, though, as far as the Darnell Wright pick, for a guy that, again, is 330 pounds, people will describe him as a mauler and he crushes people and his best blocks look really good. One of the highest percentage of negatively graded blocks. He is in the right system, so a system that is going to use the quarterback as a runner like Justin Fields, that will make blocking easier for the offensive line because of the indecision that the defensive line and especially the linebackers have to face. We see this a lot where linebackers are trying to figure out where the ball is, and before you know it, boom, the tackle's there. I mean, Wright moves well. He's going to get up there and wreck some linebackers, while they're trying to figure out, is it Justin Fields? Is it Roschon Johnson in the backfield? Is it Khalil Herbert? Who has the ball, So I think the fit, as far as maybe minimizing some of his negatives, Darnell Wright's negatives is good. Wright also looks like a very good pass protector. He has continued to improve there. People always cite the Will Anderson game, but there was others. I mean, he is a very polished pass protector, but just a 1-year sample of that for Wright at Tennessee. So he'll step in and play right tackle. I did listen to a little bit of Matt Eberflus and Ryan Poles. They thought he was the best lineman in the draft with the most upside. So they're saying, hey, we think he's good, citing his pass blocking, but they said there's room to grow there. And look, last year at this time they took Braxton Jones in the 5th round, small school, and developed him pretty well. So that's what you're banking on if you're the Bears. I wasn't as low on Tyreek Stevenson. You were the only one that I really talked to that hated Tyreek Stevenson as much as you did. So.
I got very strong Artie Burns type vibes from him.
Same school scouting.
Yeah, actually, I never even made that connection before. But also, same team, Chicago, had Artie Burns for a while.
They did.
I don't like a lot of what he does. He's another one of these guys who's athletically there. You can see that he can be a really good player, but he's reasonably good in man coverage, although he lunges a lot of times and misses, and when he does, it's bad. But I don't know that he can play zone at all at the moment. I don't know. So last year, the Bills drafted Khair Elam in the first round, and Christian Benford, by the time training camp rolled around, or by the time week 1 rolled around, a 6th-round draft pick had jumped him on the depth chart and was the guy starting and ahead of him basically all season long, outside of injuries. Wouldn't shock me in the slightest if Terrell Smith, the 5th-rounder that they got out of Minnesota, jumped Tyreek Stevenson in the same way.
I will say, I'll just drop the draft model insight in here that will be just interesting to follow for our listeners.
Okay.
The Bears, because Terrell Smith is low too, because we're taking in full careers.
Yeah, the previous seasons when he wasn't good.
because the way I've run the model, it is based off full career.
Uh-huh.
And Terrell Smith is a guy who broke out late.
Yes.
Darnell Wright is a guy who broke out late. So the model as a whole
doesn't like those
doesn't
guys.
like them, but you can understand. Like, I can understand watching last year's film and saying, yeah, I love Darnell Wright, or I love Terrell Smith from Minnesota. But I will say 3 out of the 4 Bears' top picks, including the 2 defensive tackles, Zach Pickens and Gervin Dexter, 3 out of the top 4, and then Terrell Smith, were all in the teens from a percentile standpoint in the model.
That's not good.
So I'm just saying, historically, it's not great. I'm not saying it's going to, that these guys can't be good or anything like that. But of all the players that I feel like could buck that trend, I think Darnell Wright and Terrell Smith, the corner out of Minnesota, Darnell Wright, their first-round pick, they do look the best on film. Pickens from the 2 different defensive tackles, there's not as great of a history of low production players bucking trends.
Right.
Zach Pickens and Gervin Dexter out of Florida. Those guys, Dexter, both guys 30th percentile or lower in PFF pass rush grade, in run defense grade, over the course of their career. That's going to be a little harder to overcome, I think, at the next level.
Terrell Smith was weird because people either seem to love him or have him nowhere on their list. Like Lance Zierlein, I think, had him in the top 5, something like that.
Yeah.
Like had him ranked really high.
His grades last year were very good. You see him up on the screen.
Yeah.
Grades last year were very, very good.
Exactly. Last year, if you watch just last year's tape, and he had the size, we talked before about the...
I don't think he had 69 interceptions, but,
No, I don't. But,
Maybe he did. Maybe I missed a few.
Maybe. Anyway, he has the size. He's got the athleticism. There's a lot to like. If you look at just last year, you're like, I don't get why this guy wouldn't be a top 10 corner. But overall, on Arif Hassan's consensus big board, he's the number 18th ranked corner. But Arif also has this variance, essentially, like how far apart were people generally when ranking this guy. There's no corner that had a higher variance than Terrell Smith. And I believe I'm reading this correctly, that essentially the difference in ranking on the big board was 157 spots between like the highest and the lowest point that Terrell Smith was ranked.
I think the consensus board just kind of probably misses the narrative on him, because Lance Zierlein, it felt like Lance discovered him late and put him in the top 5, and you discovered him late, and people just didn't catch up, so the consensus board didn't catch up.
Effectively, there was only one player in the entire draft who had a higher variance in terms of where people were ranking him than Terrell Smith.
Yeah, to me, that's just because people didn't get there. They didn't get to his film.
Maybe.
It happened late. Someone in the chat's asking about Gervin Dexter. Again, Florida defensive tackle. His career pass rush grade is 64. His career run defense grade is 66.8. It's just not 3 years of production. A lot of snaps. It's just not that good. He makes plays against the run. He's got good arms, and he's got good hands. He can pop offensive linemen, but he's late off the ball.
Yeah, very
late off the ball, and he just doesn't win very often. That's it. I mean, that's the bottom line. He just doesn't win often enough compared to others. So to me, that's a real stretch, real projection for a second-round pick.
Right. Bottom line for me is Chicago. You give them credit for trading out of number 1, picking up DJ Moore. Like if you put DJ Moore in this draft class, it automatically looks an awful lot better. Darnell Wright is fine. It's an interesting gamble as a player that I don't love, but I understand why teams would. And I'm curious to see how that works out within this offense, which is a good fit for him. Don't love the next 3 picks, but day 3, I like a lot more. Like you start adding now, Roschon Johnson, he's sort of seen as the other Texas running back, with Bijan Robinson, but I think that does him a big disservice. Like Roschon Johnson is a good player in his own right. Tyler Scott is a really intriguing receiver, deep threat option for them. Can do a bit more as well. He's got some underneath run after the catch ability as well. Terrell Smith, we already talked about. Noah Sewell is a very interesting player because he's got a weird body type that doesn't really look like a linebacker, but has been a pretty good player at that position.
You have a weird body type.
I do, yeah. But I like their day 3. Like, I think the second half of their draft is much more intriguing to me than the first half.
It is interesting. They actually mentioned, like, if Noah Sewell, if this was a year ago, he's going second round, or he's going much higher. So he did have a lot of hype earlier before his 2022 season. Roschon Johnson, I'm complete agreement. I like him quite a bit. Polls even cited the fact that he was used in the Wildcat a bunch. Texas offense was kind of fun to watch because you'd have Roschon and Bijan in the backfield and other guys too. But Roschon Johnson, 99th percentile missed tackles forced per attempt. As good as it gets historically, good zone runner. I think he could be a very productive runner, just very difficult to tackle. Not the fastest guy, but just difficult to tackle, holds onto the ball, really good job. I like that pick, Roschon Johnson. So, again, I liked some of the picks. I think Noah Sewell's a mid-level type of prospect, and good spot for him in round 5. So, yeah. I think for me, so PFF grade is a B+ over at PFF.com, mostly by Trevor there. I would be a little bit lower. I would grade the Bears' process as excellent over the last 2 years. They took a depleted roster, have added a lot of pieces to it. They've traded down a lot. They've added extra picks. I think the process has been outstanding by the Bears. I just didn't love a lot of their top. I didn't love their top 100 selections, basically.
Right.
Their four biggest picks. I just didn't love those all around. So I'm going to be lower on the Bears.
One of the largest undrafted free agent classes I think the NFL has, like an absolute haul of players here. The most interesting of which I think is probably Tyson Bagent, the Shepherd quarterback that a lot of people loved. Yeah, Division II. He went to did he go to the Senior Bowl? It was one of the All-Star games that he went to because essentially the NFL was saying we have to see this guy against not Division II people.
Right.
So he was getting a ton of love and a ton of interest from the NFL, and then ultimately went undrafted. But that's, anytime you pick up a guy that's getting that kind of buzz as an undrafted, unrestricted free agent, that's pretty interesting.
All right, let's go to the Detroit Lions. They kicked it off by trading down from pick number 6, trade down to number 12. They take running back Jahmyr Gibbs out of Alabama. And then their 18th, pick 18, their second first rounder, Jack Campbell, the linebacker out of Iowa. They go back to Iowa in round 2 with tight end Sam Laporta, safety Brian Branch in round 2 as well with pick 45. And then they go Hendon Hooker, the QB out of Tennessee. Surprised the people with Broderick Martin, the monster defensive tackle out of Western Kentucky. And some people like Colby Swordstall as a developmental tackle in round 5. So interesting late round picks there for the Lions, but of course the whole story is going to be they had 5 picks out of the top 68.
Yeah.
Every time we did mock drafts, we said, man, this could be an amazing haul for the Lions. I think they got very good football players. Of course, the question is going to be the positional value aspect of it. Running back, linebacker to start. What are your thoughts on the Lions draft here?
So the Lions draft requires some nuance.
I agree.
If you don't like nuance, if you just want good or bad, you probably want to stop listening for a few minutes because you need to sort of parse this out in pieces. I think, generally speaking, certainly at the top of the draft, the Lions reached, so that's bad. For good players, that's good. At positions of low value, that's bad. Now, where that balances out is the question. And the thing that will determine how good this draft is. I think when you look at it in entirety, this is going to end up looking like a very good draft. The question is, did they maximize what it could have been if they had targeted maybe more valuable positions? I also think that in this year of all years, there is more excuse for reaching, quote unquote. Usually we've been talking about that's a very bad thing to do. If you reach relative to the consensus board, the chances of you screwing up that pick are massive. But part of it, I think, is the league is catching up a little bit to position value as much as some people fight against it. So I think generally consensus boards are going to skew towards more valuable positions. So, for example, Bijan Robinson, right? You can see Bijan's ranking in consensus boards or just when you get other consensus boards that narrow the the thing a little bit. Like you can see PFF essentially dragging down Bijan's ranking because we factor in he's a running back. You can't put a running back as the second most valuable or the second best player on a big board. You have to drag him down the rankings a little bit. And similarly, you can see other big boards that don't factor in quarterback value. So they'll get like, the third best quarterback will rank in the 40s or whatever, whereas PFF's the third best quarterback is probably going to be a top 10 player regardless. So what I'm saying is I think if you do target players that are of these lower value positions, running back, off the ball linebacker, tight end, safety, you're probably going to get – it's closer than it looks in terms of a reach relative to the big board, because I think the big board is probably undervaluing those guys slightly because of the position value. So I think you can excuse that a little bit more than normal, and in this draft more than ever, I think there's value in going with the safety of just taking good players.
Well said, Sam. I think that's all fair. I mean, look, I'm torn, right? I mean, we joke about the model and this and that and the numbers I have or whatever, and every team has their own, not just numbers, they have their own convictions, right? They have their own scouting grades on this. And I listened to Brad Holmes and his press conferences after night one, and he mentioned, you see a lot of like the quotes that go around that he had or whatever. I mean, I thought he was very honest about the fact that they loved a handful of players in this draft. Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell, obviously two of them. He also admitted a couple of the players that they loved were off the board. I mean, and he was doing that like loved these players. Like he was emphasizing the love factor. I'm guessing one of those players was Devin Witherspoon, who went at number 5, the pick before the Lions would have selected at 6. And that's what's interesting about this whole thing, right? We now have this narrative that Brad Holmes, GM of the Lions, doesn't believe in positional value, and he drafted a running back in the first round, and in fact in the top 12. When I do believe if Devin Witherspoon's on the board, they probably just take him at 6, the cornerback out of Illinois. They probably take Witherspoon at 6, and then maybe they circle back and get Campbell at 18, or maybe Gibbs ends up being the pick at 18, despite the fact that Brad Holmes claims that he got very many text messages saying, oh, he never would have been there at 18. Right. Good pick.
Do people actually do that, by the way? Because everybody says that, right? Oh, as soon as you pick that guy, everyone said, damn it, you sniped me. The way they do in mock drafts.
I bet there's one or two when we do that.
Yeah. But we're not busy. You know what I mean? When we're doing those kinds of drafts, you're not really doing anything. So you're like, damn it, you stole my player.
I think
NFL GMs in the middle of the draft go, quick, you sniped me, you grabbed my player, I was going to take him 2 spots later.
It's probably always Les Snead because he never has any picks, so he's just texting everybody. But I think it does happen because in round 1, I think it can happen. GMs aren't actually that busy. Like if you're picking at pick 28, you're not doing a whole lot at pick 12, right? You're not worried about a whole bunch until it gets closer. So you could go, do whatever you want.
So my bottom line for this draft is that I think I'm coming around to the idea that the only pick of those first sort of 4 or 5 that I don't like is Jahmyr Gibbs at 12. And this is coming from the poster, the guy that's been railing against, hey, we've gone too far with the running back correction. I think you could justify Bijan Robinson. Maybe I wouldn't have done it at 8, but 10, sure. Anywhere in the teens, 12, fine. I don't think you can make the same case for Jahmyr Gibbs. Bijan Robinson is the best running back prospect we've seen come into the league in 10, 15 years. Gibbs is not. And Gibbs is great. I love Gibbs. He's a great running back. He's an explosive player. He's a dynamic weapon. He can be a part of your pass game. There's a lot to love about Jahmyr Gibbs. But in this world of, are you looking at a genuine unicorn or are you looking to find an exception? I feel like Gibbs is looking to find an exception.
Yeah.
Is Gibbs really dramatically better than a lot of other running backs that have elite speed and receiving ability and explosiveness that have come into the league in the last 10 years, And my answer to that is probably not. And even in this year where you're low on blue chip players, it's, a weird draft and all that kind of thing. I think 12 for that is just too much.
Okay, so let's there's nuance to all this again. Let me just say off the bat, I do believe in the general axioms not to draft a running back that high. Mm-hmm. If I was in draft meetings, I would discuss how much I love these players, but I would say as an organization, that's not for us. I would rather spend on a different position, no matter how much we love the player. What was interesting about hearing Brad Holmes talk about Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell again was the love for those players. And in a draft where I think we all admitted there were probably some teams who only wanted to draft maybe 8 or 10 players in the first round. And the Lions were saddled with 2 picks. And some of their players were already off the board. They did trade down, grab an extra pick or two, right? That was, as a starting point, that was excellent, I thought. And then I think they just said, there's only a handful of players that we really, really love. And I know that Brad Holmes described both players not as their position. Jahmyr Gibbs isn't a running back. Jack Campbell isn't a linebacker, which is kind of like, again, you're in these draft meetings, and I see Dan Campbell and all the scouts and the coaches are like, Jahmyr Gibbs is just a football player. He fits the culture. Like, this is what's happening in the meeting, right? He fits what we want. He's a culture fit. He's an explosive player. You can score from anywhere on the field. He's a playmaker, right? And all of that's true. All of that's true, and it's fine. But at the end of the day, he still is a running back. And there's still a pay scale for running backs. And, he's still going to be making, mid-tier running back money right off the bat. Like, that stuff still matters from a team-building standpoint.
And particularly on the offensive side of the ball, I think it speaks to this idea of looking for an exception, like seeing something that isn't really there. I think you hear a lot of times when teams zero in on an unusual skill set player on offense, when they want to talk them up, they start talking about, well, this guy's not, insert pigeonhole position here. He's a weapon. Like, he's just he's an X factor. It's like, but the league generally is not good at maximizing the use of those guys. If you have a guy, like, remember when Denard Robinson was just an offensive weapon. Like, well, okay, and how did that work out, right? He just wasn't good enough at anything to be used in the NFL. So I'm not saying that Jahmyr Gibbs is Denard Robinson in terms of not being good, but my point is, when you start articulating this guy is not a running back, he's not a receiver, he's a weapon, he's something, he's an offensive playmaker. What that is actually describing is we don't quite know what to do with this guy because he doesn't fit naturally into a normal spot. And when that is your starting point, I question whether you're best able to use what he's good at. Like, Christian McCaffrey has been talked about for years as this unique weapon, offensive playmaker. And he has, nobody's been particularly good at unlocking this, unrivaled, unique superstar potential of Christian McCaffrey. Like, you can use him more as a receiver, but the league is not good at that.
But here's where I disagree, I think, slightly here. When you say Jahmyr Gibbs is a weapon, I don't think it means you don't know what you're going to do with him. I think it means you're going to go out of your way to get him the ball. And again, this is where I think it ends up becoming, it actually becomes riskier. When you say, we have Jahmyr Gibbs, he's an offensive weapon, we're going to line him up in the slot. We're going to line him up wide. This guy needs to have 10 touches in the pass game per game, plus 10 carries. That is when I think it becomes scary. When it is good, and where I'll disagree a little bit, is I think the Niners used Christian McCaffrey perfectly fine. They didn't say, hey, we just traded a Hall for Christian McCaffrey. He's got to get his touches. There were some games where he got touches. There were some games where he lines up out wide, he has a mismatch against a linebacker, and he wins. There are some games where he carries the ball more than others, creates some big plays. But if the Niners went and said, McCaffrey's got to get his touches, that would be to the detriment of players who had more valuable touches, who is Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, and George Kittle. If the Lions take touches away from Amon-Ra St. Brown, potentially Jamison Williams down the field, and even their tight ends, if they take touches away from them to force feed Jahmyr Gibbs, then I think that's a problem. But when they use Gibbs and it's like, this week against these linebackers, he might have 8 or 10 catches and that's going to win us a game, that's where you use the offensive weapon, and I think it's okay. So I think there's a fine line between feeding a guy and just using him as your third or fourth option in playing matchups within a week where Gibbs can be really valuable.
Yeah, like the 49ers unlocked, quote-unquote, Christian McCaffrey better than anybody else has managed. And I think they did it simply by asking him to just be the running back in what is already an absolutely smoking hot offense. Like, they didn't do anything particularly special with him. They didn't do anything wildly creative. They just said, you're going to be our running back and you have more skills than the guys that were in that position beforehand.
But he played some wide receiver. He split out wide, right, and they used some formation variation and all that stuff. They used it.
But no more than like any other offense. Like, they haven't invented this. Like, so they have done a really good job of genuinely creating an offensive weapon trademark position for Deebo Samuel. They didn't do that for McCaffrey. They just made him the running back. And in that system, the running back is capable of making far more big plays because everybody else is already terrorizing defenses. So my point being, when you start talking like that, of this guy is not a running back, he's an offensive weapon, he's just a playmaker, I worry about what your plan for him actually is, and if you're wildly overestimating your capability to create something that doesn't really exist. And now look, all that being said, Ben Johnson, I think, was the coach of the year last year in terms of being able to do that kind of thing. So if you're going to lean on anybody crafting a position that doesn't exist, I'm going to say Ben Johnson is the guy to be able to get the most out of that. But I do think that when you start talking like that, you have effectively labeled a guy as something that he isn't, which is unique. And Jahmyr Gibbs is an explosive, fast running back that can catch. That's great, but they tend to come into the NFL most years. You know, I don't know that you've identified this unicorn that we haven't seen the likes of before, and which is the only way you can justify spending the 12th overall pick on him, essentially.
So, look, yeah, I think it's I don't know what the alternative is for the Lions.
At 12?
Yeah, I mean, I know you could take other players. I'm just saying here, I'm trying to get into their mentality. It feels like they only had like 6 or 7 players that they loved in the first. So you could always keep trading down. You could say, oh, they should have drafted Christian Gonzalez. But if they truly don't want him, fine. I guess before you get to that point where you just only love so many players, I think you need to factor in the positional value stuff and all that, whatever, you know?
Not just Gonzalez, right? But at that point in the draft, you would have had cornerback number 2, whoever you thought that was, wide receiver number 1, tight end number 1. How many edges had gone? 1, 2. Edge number 3. So that's probably not. You can make the case there, but like you had a lot of options. So I think there were other ways to go. Kalijah Kancey, by the way, who I think is a top 10 player, is available at either of the 2 spots that the Lions drafted their guys at. So look, that's the one position where I have a bit of a problem with it. I don't think that Jahmyr Gibbs can justify 12 overall. But
right, I'm going to give one more statement here.
Well, okay, you want to do that before and then go to the other spots?
It's going to include the other players.
Okay, so the other positions, though, I think there's a much more sound, cogent argument. Jack Campbell at 18. All right, it's a reach, fringe first rounder we were talking about. Having said that, in a draft where every linebacker looks like a weird safety hybrid, Jack Campbell has prototypical 6'5", 250-pound size and the athleticism to go with it. He is a rare linebacker in this draft. I don't really have a problem with taking him at 18. Sam Laporta at 34. You took him over a guy like Darnell Washington. I don't really have a problem with that. Laporta has incredible run after the catch ability. I think he's more suited to today's NFL. And then Brian Branch at 45, that's one of the best picks in the entire draft. I think that guy is a top 10 talent. And the league let him slide because they don't seem to know what to do with him, or his athleticism was a little bit less than they require. Either one of those two things or both put together. Either way, getting him at 45 is an absolute freaking steal. And then last one, Hendon Hooker in the 3rd round. That's a great pick. Like, that's where Hendon Hooker's supposed to go. As much as I've been railing against, like, his projection to the NFL, it's because everyone was talking about him in the 1st round, which was batshit crazy given that offense. But in the 3rd, pick 68, that's an incredible, a perfect gamble that if it pays off is one of the best picks in the draft.
Yeah, I love the value in the 2nd round, the 3rd round. Agree with a bunch of that, Sam. I think the Lions are creating a really fun offense. They were a fun offense last year, and they barely tapped into Jameson Williams' deep speed. Laporta is a very shifty tight end. He's difficult to cover, and the Lions did a great job of putting tight ends in space last year as well. And then Gibbs, the space that the Lions create for their playmakers, and they've got some really good explosive playmakers now. So all of this said, here's why I'm torn. First 4 play. I don't know if we feel the positional value thing. I don't know if we're going to feel it on the field. Brad Holmes was like, "You're gonna see these guys contribute right away." I agree with him. Like, I think we're gonna see the Lions be good next year, and I think these guys are going to contribute. So we're not. I don't know if we're not necessarily going to feel the opportunity cost of maybe not taking higher positions or whatever it may have been. But where I'm really torn is their first 4 players, all model guys that I believe in, all guys that I think do project well at the next level, and then Hendon Hooker, again, fantastic value at pick 68 in the draft, in round 3, where he probably should have gone round 2 or round 3. And there is no bad quarterback pick. I don't think Kellen Mond, who barely even made the roster after year 2, didn't make the roster after year 2. I don't think that's a bad quarterback pick. You get quarterbacks in the building and you see, and it's not throwing away a 3rd round pick. It's fine. So overall, I do like the Lions draft, even with all the questions at the top, because I do like the players. And I think they're all going to contribute. Brian Branch and Jack Campbell, as far as productive football players on that defense in a draft where there's a ton of question marks, I think it's going to end up paying off for the Lions. So that's why I'm torn.
I think they got good players. I think the only question is, again, it's opportunity cost. That's the thing I've been hammering home with running backs. It's what did you leave on the table to take a guy at that spot that is a more valuable position. And with the Gibbs one in particular, I think they left too much on the table. That's the move I think they goofed on. Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta, Brian Branch, no real problem with those picks. I think they added good football players at positions that they can use. And then Hendon Hooker, I think, is a phenomenal gamble to take. I think that's a brilliant pick for them. So overall, I think this was a good draft. The Jahmyr Gibbs pick is the one that I question.
It's a B+ over at PFF.com. B+ for the Lions. A nuanced take on the Lions here.
Nobody likes nuance.
Green Bay Packers. They up next?
Did they get anybody interesting as an undrafted free agent?
I don't know.
No, you don't. They got Starling Thomas. There you go.
Oh, I like Starling Thomas. The 5th.
Yep, the 5th.
Out of UAB, athletic corner. Get him in the mix.
Anytime a guy has been iterating for 4 or 5 generations, you've got to take that guy.
It's going to be the best one.
Right.
It's going to be the best one. Green Bay Packers are up next. They start with Lucas Van Ness, pick 13 that they got from the New York Jets. Tight end Luke Musgrave out of Oregon State. They go Jaden Reed, the wide receiver out of Michigan State, in the second round. They double up at tight end. A common Packers move. Tucker Kraft, the tight end out of South Dakota State, in round 3. And then day 3 was just loaded with picks. Colby Wood, an edge out of Auburn. Sean Clifford, the QB out of Penn State. I did not expect him to get drafted. Dontavian Wicks. Some people had Wicks as one of their top receivers. Look at him going in the 5th round. What was the NFL missing there? Carl Brooks, the edge. We have him as a defensive tackle, but he's an edge in Sam's mind from Bowling Green. He is 300 pounds, so he should be a defensive tackle.
He will be a defensive tackle, but he was an edge and should remain an edge because he's really good there.
And the other 2 very interesting picks in round 7. Anthony Johnson Jr., some people's first-round safety out of Iowa State.
Some people's.
And Grant Dubose, wide receiver out of Charlotte.
Can't quietly
very
call
cryptic.
out the boss. He was on the show and he listens.
Chris loved Anthony Johnson Jr., the safety out of Iowa State. I was a little concerned that Chris would never get to see Anthony Johnson play football unless it was like the Hall of Fame game or something where he was, an undrafted, but he's a 7th rounder that can make this team in Green Bay.
Ben Fennell on Twitter thinks he could start. I mean, a 7th rounder that could end up replacing Adrian Amos and start for them.
I can't wait till Chris is sitting there. It's December. It's Green Bay. He's got the sweater look going because it's freezing there, right?
The quarter zip.
It's the quarter zip going, and it's like, there he is. There's my guy, Anthony Johnson. Starting safety for the Packers.
Single tear rolls down his eye, just pride,
Yeah. Eat that, NFL. Look at him now. Look at him now. What did you think of the Packers draft, Sam?
Yeah, an interesting draft. So I didn't love Lucas Van Ness, the player generally. So obviously I'm not going to be as wild on that one. But they needed receivers across the board. Their 3 next picks were all receivers of some description, 2 tight ends and Jaden Reed, the wide receiver. I think that's good. I like that strategy of doubling up when you have a big need. Try and maximize your capacity to actually hit. Luke Musgrave, a lot of people seem to sour on him as the process went on. I'm not quite sure why. I mean, I think he's got the ability, the talent, the athleticism. Obviously, the sample size is pretty small because he only lasted a couple of games last year before getting hurt. But, I mean, he looked like he could be an impact receiver. Tucker Kraft has really good athleticism, can at least double your chances that one of those guys hits. And then some of the day 3 picks I think are fascinating. Like Carl Brooks, one of my favorite players in the entire draft. That guy's PFF grades, the production of Bowling Green were nuts. He had 61 pressures last season, I think. Pass rush win rates of like 23%, something crazy like that. One of the most productive players in the entire nation. But he's a 300-pound edge rusher who tested like a hippo. Like his testing numbers were atrocious.
Like a hippo.
They were abysmal. Like, let me call up his thing, you therefore don't know what to do with him. Like a 300-pound edge rusher doesn't work, so he's going to have to play inside at some capacity. And then what does that look like if you have zero athleticism profile to bring to the table? Okay, measurables. 40-yard dash, 6th percentile. 10-yard split, 7th percentile. Vertical jump, 3rd percentile, 27 inches. Broad jump, 7th percentile. The short shuttle, the 1st percentile, a 5-second short shuttle. That's like what The 3-cone, that was his best movement measurable, the 13th percentile, a 7.63 second 3-cone time. I mean, these are catastrophic workout numbers to the point where you're like, how is this guy even getting drafted? These are non-viable numbers. You cannot function in the NFL with that kind of athletic profile. But his tape is it's really good. And I actually think it's really good on the edge. I think he's a better edge rusher than he was inside. Anytime they moved him inside, he didn't have the same kind of array of moves. He didn't have the same kind of production. He's a good edge rusher somehow, despite being 296, 300 pounds.
Is the 300-pound Carl Brooks better on the edge and the 265, 270-pound Lucas Van Ness better on the interior?
Yes. Almost, unquestionably so, based off the current evidence, in my opinion.
I've given credit to the Chiefs for having all sorts of different body types and multi-gap players and everything. It does seem like the Packers have an interesting crew with that stuff too, right? Rashawn Gary and Van Ness maybe as your starting edges by name, but Preston Smith is still there. Van Ness can move around. Devontae Wyatt's more of an interior penetrator, last year's first-rounder at defensive tackle. But then you add Carl Brooks to the mix as another move-around big body type.
So I asked on Twitter, every year you get these guys with the Kyer Elam, Christian Benford thing, right? Players that are drafted lower than somebody at the same position in the same year by the same team and end up jumping that player.
I have some answers for you, too,
on the depth chart.
I got some answers.
Well, I think the Packers, they've got 3 guys that could do it. I mean, the Packers could have Tucker Kraft easily jump Luke Musgrave. That wouldn't be shocking at all. They're vaguely similar in terms of ranking by a lot of people. At wide receiver, they drafted 3 of them, Jaden Reed, Dontavian Wicks, and Grant Dubose. I really liked Grant Dubose as a day 3 guy, very sort of raw and new to the position, but has a lot of skills. Wouldn't shock me if he jumped one or both of the guys above him. And crazy as it sounds, I mean, Carl Brooks, I think, is a better edge rusher than Lucas Van Ness right now.
Oh, you're crazy.
Now, who knows where they're going to play? Like, both those guys may end up seeing most of their time inside, and Lucas Van Ness is very new to the position, very inexperienced. He could get an awful lot better. But it wouldn't be crazy if Carl Brooks ended up jumping him early.
I want to go
playing time.
I want to go through the Packers draft history really quick because this history of doubling up on positions is really fascinating that they've done. I mean, you could go all the way back to 2012 where they drafted Jarrell Worthy, the defensive tackle, in round 2, and then Mike Daniels, the defensive tackle, in round 4. Daniels was the guy that ended up being better. More specifically, though, 2015 they drafted Demarius Randall. Safety by name, but they played him at corner. Demarius Randall at corner and then Quentin Rollins at corner with their first 2 picks, right? And then they come back 2 years later and they go, or 3 years later, and they go back-to-back corners again. 2018, Jair Alexander and Josh Jackson, both corners. And then they go 3 wide receivers, Jamon Moore, Marquez Valdez-Scantling, and Equinemius St. Brown. And in all of these situations, they found one, right? Jair was good, Josh Jackson, not good. Valdez-Scantling was very productive. The other 2 receivers, not so much. They did this again last year with Romeo Doubs in the second, Christian Watson in the second. Now, both of those guys I think are going to prove to be valuable, but they specifically double up at this position of need. And not just positions of need, but positions that are pretty valuable where they're saying we're going to take multiple shots at this to find one. We're going to take 2 shots or 3 shots to find one, and it's worked out pretty well for the Packers historically.
And the number of times that it's not the top guy that ends up being the best player of the doubling up process is huge. Like, for everyone that's going to look at this and say, oh, there's no way any of those guys jumped the guy ahead of them. Like, obviously there's a reason they're taken below the player that was taken ahead. But the number of times that the second or third player in the double or triple up process jumps the guy ahead of him it's not as small as you would think it is. It happens pretty regularly.
So I'm real interested by that, right? The 2 tight ends, Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft. The thing with Musgrave, he is an interesting prospect because he had no production until 2022. And his 2022 production was 2 games.
Yeah.
And he gets hurt. But he looks really good in those 2 games. 6'6" frame. He moves well. He's a kind of a clunky route runner sometimes, but you can understand where there's some development there, but you see the body and the movement skills, and it's like he can go up and get it. I think between Musgrave and Kraft, you could use both, but you're going to, probably have one of those guys that emerges as a tight end. And Jaden Reed, I think, is more of a change of pace. He can do jet sweep stuff. He's a pretty good route runner. He wins at the catch point. Jaden Reed does a lot of things pretty well at receiver. But, it'll be interesting to see if just Grant Dubose, who was a slick route runner, beat Deontay Banks for a touchdown when they played Maryland and good body control. And I'm surprised Grant Dubose from Charlotte lasted all the way to the 7th.
Same.
I think the Packers draft might be one of those where you look at the volume. What was it? 12 players, 13 players? Do you find 4 or 5 players out of this? Yeah, they might come from various rounds, though. Look, I think I don't know if Van Ness will ever be a star, but I think he's a good, solid player, kind of an old school 5-tech body that will fit in with the group of pass rushers that they have in Green Bay.
Mm-hmm.
Sean Clifford in round 5. He's right there with your DTR from UCLA, like those quarterbacks who start their career with such inconsistency, where you're like, no way these guys ever become prospects. But like DTR got better and better and better, where Clifford was still as maddeningly inconsistent in his final year at Penn State, like year 12, whatever it was. And I was a little surprised to see him go that high.
Yeah.
He's a talented guy. He's a talented quarterback that was just like, mediocre college quarterback.
Yeah, it's kind of fascinating the way some teams sometimes value that area of pick. Like, 5th round is still, like, you can get some players in the 5th round, and yet you take a guy that's basically, a total projection.
Just to put a bow on their draft, Anthony Johnson from Iowa State, we were joking about, like, Chris Collinsworth watched the film and loved him. Yeah. Absolutely loved him.
And isn't alone in that.
Yeah, and other people did too. And I mentioned too, he was a model identifier last year. He had good production at corner.
Model adjacent.
And he was on my watch list this year. But that he converted to safety at Iowa State. He was just far less inconsistent. But the two things I like, it's multiple positions that he's played, been pretty productive. And then he did have one of the fastest pure straight line speed times using our in-game game athleticism. So you see a lot of the potential there, but for a 7th round pick where the paths to the field, you have last year of Darnell Savage, we have Rudy Ford, Tariq Carpenter, Tarvarius Moore. There's a path to the field for 7th round safety Anthony Johnson out of Iowa State, where he actually could see some time for the Packers here. So I think the Packers are going to steal some production from 2 or 3 of these day 3 players, and we're going to like this draft over time.
Yeah, it's probably not going to be the players necessarily that, I individually like or that you individually like, but this looks like the kind of draft which is exactly what you do if you have that many needs, if you need some contributors. Like, you draft a bunch of times, you double up at some positions, and you essentially play the odds, right? Like, this is an acknowledgement of the fact that we're not great at this, that your strike rate might be 30%. But if it's 30%, fine. Draft 3 wide receivers. One of them hits statistically. Draft a couple of tight ends. One of them might hit statistically. Draft a couple of defensive linemen. One of them statistically probably hits. Like, this is what they've done. They needed players at certain positions. They've shotgunned their approach at it. They drafted a bunch of guys they liked, and then they hoped that statistically, by the odds, they're going to get contributors out of each one of those spots and therefore fill their needs.
I'll say, of their first 5 picks, I don't have strong feels about any of them. Like, any of their first 3 rounders, rounds 1 through 3 there. Van Ness, Musgrave, Jaden Reed, Tucker Kraft, their first 4. I don't have strong feels either way, so don't love, don't hate.
Yeah, I guess. I don't have wildly
Jaden Reed did go higher, much higher than expected. I think his consensus board was in the hundreds or so, and he goes at 50.
I think Musgrave at 42 is a solid pick. I think, I like Musgrave, and I like the 2 tight ends the most of their first 4 picks. I think those are good players at solid value at a wildly needy position.
So we go B+ for the Packers over at PFF.com. Minnesota Vikings up next to round out the NFC North. They start with your guy, wide receiver Jordan Addison in round 1. Cornerback Mekhi Blackman back to USC in round 3 at pick 102. They only picked from a couple schools here, I see. Jay Ward at LSU, the corner/safety in round 4. Jaquelin Roy, defensive tackle, nose tackle more than anything over at LSU. Jaron Hall, the QB out of BYU. And then Dwayne McBride, running back out of UAB. Some people loved Dwayne McBride. I think Trevor said that was his RB3.
Yeah. So
McBride, who I get, McBride is a really good player. Getting him in round 7 looks like a potential steal.
The PFF draft tracker. If you're watching the draft through the thing, one of the features of it is you get who people want to get picked at a certain spot. We've reached X position in the draft. You vote on who you want the next pick to be, and for the last 3 rounds, everybody was just Dwayne McBride. That was the pick everybody wanted for their team. So Yeah, so
Not Max Duggan.
no, this is like the opposite of the Packers draft, right? The Packers took this approach of, we have a few positions of need, let's attack them with volume and maximizing our chances by doubling and tripling up. The Vikings essentially did the opposite and went, well, we're only going to pick 6 times in the draft, and let's just hope that we're better at identifying talent than other people. So we'll take wide receiver Jordan Addison in the first round, and then our next pick is the 3rd round. We'll take a cornerback, Mekhi Blackman from USC, and those are our main positions. Now, they did double up with Jay Ward later on, but they're basically relying on having identified the 2 USC players as being able to make an impact pretty much right away.
Yeah, so Kwesi's second draft here too, and didn't have as many picks. But so their second round pick went to the Lions for T.J. Hawkinson.
Yeah,
and when we mentioned the positional value stuff, they went.
Did you? Yeah, they were very high on the position value.
So 2 years in a row, all of their top picks. Last year they went corner safety or safety corner. This year they go wide receiver corner and then a hybrid corner safety. They have so far pretty much gone with the positional value stuff, and then the lower positions, your guards, your defensive tackles, and all that stuff in the middle rounds, they have kind of stuck to that so far through 2 years under Kwesi.
Did your hunt through press conferences and sound bites?
I didn't get to them.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
I was curious about how much, because obviously, they would have, it seems like they would have been better served to trade back early and pick up extra picks. They didn't get it done. Now, were they looking to do that, or were they happy that Jordan Addison had fallen to 23 and just made that pick?
I did get to that, actually. I did see some Kwesi quotes where they lasted as long as they could on the clock, and he did say they had a lot of options. So I know there's so many trades now. I think the Vikings were looking to trade back. I just don't know if they got the value that they would have wanted.
Right.
The teams that were later in the first round, the Bills obviously were trying to trade up for Dalton Kincaid, and they did. Mm-hmm. The Bengals were getting a ton of calls to trade up to 28. So I don't know if – and I think it was the Titans. I think the Titans were very active trying to go get Will Levis. I don't know how early, though. Right. So I think they were trying to go get Levis at 26, 27, 28 range. Maybe not as early as 23. Did you see the clip on Chris Long's podcast about from Brandon Beane?
Yes.
About when he traded up, he actually had to tell the Jags who he was
multiple people. So the Giants had to do it as well when they flipped the spot. The Giants basically had to tell him that they weren't going to take his guy, Trent Baalke.
Yeah, Trent Baalke with the Jags. He traded down twice and made the teams that traded up assure him that he wasn't taking Anton Harrison, the tackle from Oklahoma, which isn't normally the protocol there.
No, but it's not.
I thought it was smart by Baalke. You're like, you don't want to miss out on your guy, and it's like, I still want to trade down.
Yeah,
so
I mean, it's like,
give me some assurance.
It's not the way it's done, but it's a fairly reasonable stipulation. Like, I want a specific player, and I'm willing to trade down, but not if I risk losing him. So you're going to have to convince me you're not. And with the Giants, they seem perfectly happy essentially to say, here's the guy we're picking, do it or not. For the Bills, he had to do it through a series of like indirect questions, It's like offense or defense? Offense. Big or small? Medium. It's like, are you taking a tight end?
I think we're good.
Yeah, then we're probably all right.
I think that's hilarious, by the way. I think it's hilarious.
So
I'm a little surprised that the Vikings only picked 6 times.
Yes, I would imagine that runs contrary to what you would expect Kwesi to do as a process standpoint. So this is a draft where I'm on the fence and I'm consciously torn between they drafted with their earliest picks and Dwayne McBride as well. They drafted players that I like, but the process of only picking 6 times is not good to me. And as much as I love Mekhi Blackman, that I think that was a lot higher than his ranking on the consensus board, right?
It was, yeah. I mean, I think he was expected. I saw him going as high as the 200s. Yikes. In the 7th, which, look, I think you and I both evaluated him, probably thought that was a mistake. I'd be happy taking him in the 5th.
So 98. No, sorry. Where am I? Yeah. 197 was his spot in the no, 185. I'm looking at the wrong Mekhi.
185. He goes at pick 102. So it's not egregious, but yeah, it's a lot higher than he was expected to go. I like both players, though. Jordan Addison, I think, of all the receivers, let me talk about the players for a minute, and then we'll get to the fact that they picked only 6 times. Addison's a very good player. I think, route running, I mentioned on the broadcast his game speed is better than his time speed because we have in-game, video
Tracking data.
We have in-game tracking data, computer vision tracking data, and so he's faster in the game than he is on the track.
He was my number one receiver throughout the process. Remember, this is a guy that won the Biletnikoff Award, right, back when he was with Pitt.
Yes.
When Kenny Pickett was his quarterback, transfers to USC, plays a different role, still has obviously an elite quarterback with Caleb Williams throwing him the ball, but has shown now that he can play inside or outside, slot, or boundary. He can win at all levels of the field. He can win deep. He can take bubble screens and have success with them. He can win over the middle. He has shown that he has greater greater on-field speed than his measurable speed. The biggest question really is his size. Like, he showed up and weighed 170 something pounds. Now, number one, I don't really care. I think he's shown that it's not a massive deal to the way he plays the game. Number two, it's not like that's necessarily all he'll ever be. As much as there are players that are never going to get any bigger. There was a thing recently, Garrett Williams. Garrett Williams is not a big receiver either, right? He was 180 or something when he came out. Now, Garrett Williams said, I think that he...
Wilson?
Yes, Wilson, sorry.
Yeah.
Garrett Wilson, last year's Rookie of the Year. So obviously, weight is not a massive deal for him, but he's quote-unquote undersized relative to, you want a 200-pound body receiver, blah, blah, blah. I think he said that he finished last season at 181 and was now up to 188 and wants to end up being 190 something, right? So it's not like this is necessarily a static, this is what you are forever and a day. Jordan Addison weighs 170 something pounds, could easily end up playing in the NFL at like 185, at which point nobody cares. That's a fine size. It's still undersized. It's not the 200-pound body you want, but it's not like, oh, this is a problem, we can't have this, particularly when he's a secondary threat next to Justin Jefferson, who is like your prototypical number one, can do everything. So I love this fit for the offense. I love the player generally. I think this was their second best pick, because I think Dwayne McBride was their best pick in the 7th round. But this is a great pick. And then I love Mekhi Blackmon, the player. But I am concerned by the fact that they picked him like 100 spots higher than his ranking on the consensus board.
Yeah, I mean, we both liked Blackmon on tape. He had unbelievable interception against Oregon State and uses his hands really well in press. They're going to play a lot more press man in Minnesota. I think
a real needed corner.
Yeah, tenacious at the catch point and all that stuff. So I think Blackmon has a path to the field here for Minnesota. So yeah, I like those top two players. Jay Ward was never really productive at LSU. Never graded above 55 in a full season, above 60 in a full season. Hybrid, slot, safety. So again, I don't love him. And Roy, the nose tackle, I know our guy Seth Galina loved him, but again, production-wise was kind of similar to the defensive tackles that the Bears selected. So projection's not great necessarily for him, and McBride I think can contribute and be a player. I am surprised with how much activity there was in the draft. There were so many trades after round 1. So many round 2, round 3, round 4, guys moving up, extra picks, this and that. I am surprised that the Vikings didn't trade down, not just because Kwesi's there, not just because you think he's got the type of guy that's going to draft 10 times every year, but also because of the place where the Vikings are from a roster standpoint.
Yes.
Because they just gutted the roster, you're losing veterans, and you have to replenish it with just more players, young players that you're trying to buy more lottery tickets.
Now, one thing that we need to loop in now based off exactly that. Okay, one general criticism. They didn't have as many picks as you would have expected them to amass or create or blah, blah, blah. Having said that, they had one of the biggest and one of the most interesting undrafted free agent classes, if you want to call it that, right?
Yeah, loop it in.
They went hard on undrafted free agents. So if you're not going to pick as many times as other people, how do you offset that? Well, you can go after the priority undrafted free agents, and you can make them a priority, because at that point it's essentially a bidding marketplace. And the Vikings signed Andre Carter, the edge rusher from Army, and gave him what is one of the largest undrafted free agent contracts that has ever been given out in NFL history. He got guaranteed $340,000, something like that, which is a monster number for an undrafted rookie. So they went hard after these guys.
Strong the highest?
It might have been, yeah.
Like 250, 260 last year, biggest guarantee.
So Andre Carter, it's one of the largest undrafted free agent deals that's ever been signed. They also got Ivan Pace Jr., the Cincinnati linebacker that's like 5'10", 230 pounds, blitzes like an absolute freight train. He's a fascinating player. They got a lot of very interesting players as an undrafted free agent and clearly prioritized it with money. So I think you have to link that with the fact that they only picked 6 times. That's not ideal. That's not great process generally, but like it looks like they consciously acknowledged that and tried to fix it, tried to redress that with their undrafted free agent pool.
I saw Lance Erline, our friend, say teams are spending so much in undrafted free agency. Agents are going to start wanting their players to not get drafted. They're going to want an undrafted free agency.
And that's been for a while.
But he also phrased it as like teams are going to start drafting the players they want in the 6th and 7th instead of waiting until undrafted free agency. It's like, shouldn't that always be the case? Like if Andre Carter got drafted in the 6th instead of going undrafted, there'd be somebody that got drafted in the 6th or 7th that is undrafted that's going to get money because he's like, there's still always going to be coveted players in undrafted free agency. So yeah, of course you should draft the guys that you want before they hit undrafted free agency, so you could draft them and control them. I didn't understand the premise. Draft the players that you want. Don't let them hit free agency.
But
if they do hit free agency, go get them. Fine.
Evidently, teams aren't necessarily doing that because there are these guys that are wildly coveted undrafted free agents that teams have the opportunity to pick in the 7th round and don't.
So I think where there's an issue with teams drafting is they're not really trying to hit home runs with every single pick. And it's harder to hit home runs in round 6 and 7, but I do think there are still players you would lean toward who have a chance to compete to start at some point. And I think at that point it's a lot of like, hey, this scout pounded the table and this guy's region needs a guy. And I know they did that in baseball. You hear about that in football a lot. Or we really need a gunner. Got to get that gunner in round 6 or 7. I think that's the problem. Like, keep drafting the best players all the way through the end of the draft. Fill all your needs in undrafted free agency. You find your gunner later or somewhere else. Or just don't have a gunner because you're not going to punt. That's how you handle it.
Mm-hmm.
B- for the Vikings over at PFF.com. Sound fair?
Yeah. I think when you factor in – so the undrafted free agents are interesting. Like Andre Carter – I think is a fascinating. I would have said day 3 was the project I think he should have been. Like, he's going to look like a player that was wild. There was great value because people had him like in the 3rd round and some crazy stuff like that. Where did he actually end up on the consensus board? Edge rusher.
Who?
Andre Carter.
Well, so here's Carter's deal, right? Like, we were probably overrating him last year.
So he was 101 on the consensus board.
We were probably underrated. Did you see his workout recently? Did you catch up on that again?
Did I watch it, or did I see the numbers?
Did you see the numbers? Like, they popped in my face the other day. I was like, oh, yeah, I forgot. The workout was terrible.
Yeah, not good.
But Andre Carter last year at this time was like a hopeful first-rounder as a pass rusher who needed work in the run game. And he's very tall.
6'6".
Very tall, but skinny, right? Skinny legs and just doesn't – but you made the point, is this because he's in the Army training? Is that that's worth taking a shot on because he's a talented – pass rusher.
Yes.
And only could bulk up in the NFL.
And only the straight line explosive things were bad from the workout. The change of direction stuff was good. 3-cone, short shuttle.
I don't know how the Army's working out these days, but like I know probably used to be a lot of distance running and all that stuff, which is all terrible for football.
Exactly.
You would never do distance running.
And terrible for explosion.
For any sport, really, other than running.
But but specifically for explosiveness.
Of course,
like there's the trade-off between long distance stamina and quick twitch fibers explosion. So it tallies. It all makes sense in this world of let's build a profile, let's put all the data points together and let's sort of say what's going on here. You've got a guy who's in the Army, and look, I never went through boot camp. I have no earthly idea what I'm talking about.
We're guessing a little bit here.
Right. Yeah. But judging from the movies, there's an awful lot of running around with a pack on your back involved, right?
Yeah, they're probably doing sit-ups all the time. That's terrible.
There's a lot of long-distance stamina type of stuff in the Army. I also don't imagine they're feeding you like the very best nutrition humanly possible to build mass and all that kind of stuff. So if we can assume a basic logical tenet of the man is probably not at the weight that he could or should be at if he was in football shape for his entire, like that was number one focus. And number two, the things that he's really been training at the majority of his time, have actually been taking away from some of the things you really want him to be good at, which is explosion. Then you marry
Can we
that.
move on?
No.
Are we done?
No. Then you marry that with the fact that he is in the 80th percentile or higher for change of direction stuff. As a 6'6" dude, he's huge. If you pile 20 pounds of muscle on him and work on his quick twitch, now that he's like eating protein shakes and not, whatever powers you for a 15-mile run. My point being, I think in a 2 or 3 year project, Andre Carter could end up being a starting player in the NFL, not just a dude that like makes a roster. But it was going to be a 2 or 3 year project, that's a day 3 thing. Now, the fact that he slipped out of the draft entirely, it was surprising to me. But it means that the Vikings, as an undrafted free agent, okay, it costs them some money, but they've potentially got a guy that belongs in the middle round somewhere.
Let's not overrate it too much. It's an intriguing thing. I don't think the money, like Carson Strong's already been cut after having a record signing bonus last year, the QB out of Nevada. So, yeah, I think it's a good move, Andre Carter, but we need to move on to the Baltimore Ravens.
Yeah, like, look, the strike rate of any day 3, 4th round pick and beyond is not good. But I think it's worth acknowledging that, for the cost of some money, the Vikings may have effectively bought themselves a guy who has as much chance to hit or as much upside as a guy drafted in the 5th round or whatever.
True. All right, Baltimore Ravens. We're on to the AFC North. Ravens start with Zay Flowers at pick 22, the wide receiver out of Boston College. Their 2nd round pick went to Chicago, right, in the Roquan Smith deal. Trenton Simpson, the linebacker out of Clemson, round 3 with pick 86. Tavius Robinson, edge out of Ole Miss. And then Kyu Blue Kelly, cornerback out of Stanford in round 5. I've never said this Oregon guy's name. In round 6, developmental tackle, though. And then Andrew Voorhees, guard out of USC in round 7.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the Ravens draft, Sam?
I think it was an unusual draft for them. This didn't seem to be the typical Baltimore Ravens draft.
This is the first time I have not loved the Ravens draft in years. And I think it's in part, I may have, from a modeling standpoint, I may have stumbled into some similarities to what the Ravens have found.
You reverse engineered the Ravens process. Is that what you're saying?
I have not reverse engineered a process that is far more sophisticated than my process. All I'm saying is a lot of the numbers I pull out say, hey, look at this guy that the Ravens drafted in the 3rd or 4th round who ended up being pretty good. That's happened a bunch. And they didn't draft those guys this year. They didn't draft model guys this year in the 3rd round. I thought they were going to stick to that.
So you're trying to say that maybe Baltimore hates their own draft? They're the one team. You cut to the camera and everyone's like, yeah, woo. And Baltimore's like, God, that was another one that didn't really go that great. The numbers don't love that guy.
There may have been people in the building who were like, no, they're not listening to us now.
Just off camera as the bunch of guys that power the model and data, they're all like, what are we doing here?
Yeah, that could have happened. I don't know. Starting with Zay Flowers at 22.
Mm-hmm.
I'll admit, this should be a good fit with the Ravens. I think, the thing I wanted to mention about Addison, I think Jordan Addison with the Vikings has to become the number 2 right away as soon as possible.
Yep.
With Justin Jefferson, Zay Flowers, and the other receivers in the 1st round, I think can start off as a 3rd or 4th option. And for Zay Flowers with the Ravens, much like the Chiefs, this offense should create some space and let him work. And I think that could be a really nice fit for him creating some explosive plays here for Baltimore.
Yeah, you were talking about Zay Flowers, the fit being Kansas City for him. Like he's a more valuable player in that Kansas City offense because of what he can do there and how that system suits him. I think that Baltimore is a great fit for him as well. I don't love Zay Flowers, the player. Neither of us did. For me, pick number 22 is high. It's higher than he should go. But I love that fit. And I'm excited to see what he can be because, the bottom line with all this stuff is a wide variety of opinions are perfectly acceptable for a player. Like this is not a science. Everybody's hitting 30% as a strike rate. So the fact that the same player can be viewed as, can he be anything really more than a Dante Hall slot receiver adjusted for 2023 inflation, or a bunch of other people, like multiple other people saying, this is Antonio Brown 2.0 on the field, not. So the fact that 2 different people can come to those extremes of conclusion on the same guy is fascinating to me. So I'm really intrigued and interested to see what Zay Flowers becomes. Like he's one of the most interesting players to watch now in the first couple of years for me because the opinions on him were so wildly divergent.
So, and then the Ravens are another team. They only picked 6 times for a team that last year at this time was trading Marquise Brown for an extra first. Loved their last year they got Kyle Hamilton and Tyler Linderbaum in the first round, both high-end model guys who became very good. But 2 first-rounders, right? And then in the second round and third round, they're getting all these, David Ojabo. So, he's part of this draft class, maybe, Sam, coming off of his injury. Travis Jones. They're getting all these guys who could have gone in the first, were mocked to go in the first. And, this year just didn't feel like that as much because they didn't pick as often or whatever it may have been. But I Zay Flowers to go with Rashad Bateman and Odell Beckham, to go with Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews. Now we're talking. Now I'm looking forward to see what Todd Monken can do with this offense, how it changes, how much they still tap into Lamar the runner versus trying to distribute to what looks like maybe the best group of pass catchers that they've had. There was a point a couple years ago where it looked like it could have been strong, but then guys got hurt and everything. They might be back on track, though, from a pass catcher standpoint, depending on how well OBJ comes back and what Zay Flowers becomes. But I think he's explosive and he's good after the catch, and the Ravens will give him an opportunity to tap into those skills. Trenton Simpson in the third. I think that's a good, solid pick. There was people that had him going as high as the first round to the Bills for whatever that's worth.
Yep.
And then Simpson's going to come in. He's going to replace Patrick Queen, who they did not pick up the 5th-year option on Patrick Queen. So Simpson comes in, probably starts in 24, adds some depth here. And I think he needs the time to develop. He's very, very fast. Sprints fast in a straight line. But much like Patrick Queen and some of the other developmental linebackers over the last couple of years, it's very similar. A feel for zone coverage is not there. Overall feel for football playing isn't there, but the potential is because the athleticism is there. So Simpson's good in the third, right? At pick 86, I like that value-wise. Beyond that, I'm not sure that there's a day 3 pick that I love. Like Tavius Robinson I don't know where he was on the consensus, but...
You don't love Voorhees?
No, Voorhees is good. That's good.
I think that's 7th round for... Okay, he tore his ACL on the...
I'm sorry, that is potentially stealing a future starter on the offensive line in round 7 because of the injury. That is really smart by the Ravens. I like that a lot.
So we've said this before, I think, but the story for him is insane. Like, he tore his ACL on the field and the combine during the drills, went down, and it didn't look good right away, and it came out he did, in fact, tear his ACL. So that's bad for anybody, let alone an offensive lineman. He then stayed there. Like, he tore his ACL. They stuck his leg in one of those, long, full-length cast things. He used crutches to hobble his way out to the bench press, sat down on the bench press, dangled that one wrecked leg off the side of it, and then rep 225 pounds 38 times, which is I think that was the highest of anybody at the combine that year. And it's, that's an insane total generally. That's one of the better numbers you're going to see from anybody. That on its own would have me I would draft him in the 7th round if that's all I knew about him. All I knew was that story. I'm taking that guy in the 7th round. I want, in a league that still values the grit test.
Loves ball, baby.
Is there anything more gritty than that? No, I'm not going to go home and get medical attention. I'm going to strap it up. I'm going to bench 38 times with a leg hanging off the side of it. But he's also a good player. In 2021, he had a 90-plus PFF grade. He's given up 2 sacks in the last 2 years.
He's a good player.
Yeah, he's a versatile, good player that could easily be a starting guard for the Ravens, in a year's time. Again, a 2024 pick with obvious determination and grit.
That's an outstanding pick. I apologize. That's a great pick at 229. Should always want to make that pick because they may have stolen a starter. The Ravens do good at stealing starters. The Morgan Moseses of the world and just grabbing starters on the cheap, and I think Voorhees has a chance to be that guy.
And also, it's the perfect, in the 7th round, if your concern about a guy is, he's torn his ACL, he might not play this year. All right.
Yeah,
I don't need him in this year. If I can get him in the 7th round, the only downside is he's going to play 2024 and beyond. That's fine.
So that was a good pick there. I like that. Tavius Robinson, the edge in round 4. I don't know where he was on the consensus, Sam, but that seemed higher than expectation. Developmental edge, 6'6", 257, ran fast. Didn't have great production at any point in his career. But
212.
212?
Yep.
So they got him about 100 picks, almost 100 picks higher than expectation. Do with that what you want. Okay, draft by the Ravens. We gave it a B over at PFF.com. All right, on to the Cincinnati Bengals. They kicked it off with Miles Murphy, the edge out of Clemson, cornerback DJ Turner out of Michigan in the second round. Safety Jordan Battle out of Alabama in the third. Wide receiver Charlie Jones at Purdue. Running back Chase Brown out of Illinois. Andre Yosivas from Princeton, the wide receiver. Is that right?
Yosivas.
Yosivas.
Or Yoshivas, depending on who you listen to.
There you go. And then a punter, round 6, Brad Robinson out of Michigan. Michigan just pumping out special teamers, kickers, and punters in this draft. And then cornerback DJ Ivey out of Miami in round 7. What did you think of the Bengals draft, Sam?
Yeah, I liked it quite a lot. My concern for them going into this was where's the right tackle coming from? But if they think that they can get Jonah Williams to kick over to right tackle to play there and to get back towards his baseline of previous years, not what he did last year, giving up 13 sacks, then that's fine. Miles Murphy at 28, I think is good value. There's questions about his tape. He didn't really get any better from his freshman season, where he looked like he was going to become like one of those guys, one of those true elite edge rusher prospects. But the flashes have been there all the way along. Like, you turn on his tape at any period and you see, oh wow, this guy has the potential to be amazing. He's quick twitch, he's big, he's got all the traits you want. So to take him at 28, I think is really good value. Your guy, DJ Turner, model guy, cornerback in the second round, good value. Jordan Battle in the third is great value. Charlie Jones, that could be your replacement for Tyler Boyd.
Yeah.
They're going to need to get cheaper at certain places before too long. Charlie Jones could easily end up being, the Tyler Boyd replacement before long. And then Chase Brown in the 5th round. Like, this is a draft, it's long on running backs. Chase Brown could easily be a big part of that offense, replace Samaje Perine. And then Andre Yosivas, the receiver, I mean, him and Charlie Jones, I think, are going to compete for return duties. And Yosivas has, like, the potential to develop down the line in this world where my gut reaction now is that T. Higgins is going to take the Jesse Bates pathway. I don't think they plan on keeping him around long term. I think they plan on keeping him reasonably short term, to the point where they'll 5th-year option, franchise tag, and then
there's no 5th-year option, but it'll be year 4 here and then franchise tag.
Right. So year 4 and then franchise tag, and then draw a line and say we're not going beyond that. If that's the case, that's like a 2-year pathway for Yosivas to develop into that secondary guy.
See, I think a draft like this gives them the opportunity to play with the idea of keeping Jamar Chase and T. Higgins long-term, of course, with Joe Burrow long-term. And the Bengals are one of the more interesting teams because we're trying to figure out how they can make all that work going forward. And I think their draft is the best combination of short, intermediate, and long-term needs being addressed without sacrificing value. There was no point in this draft where I think they drafted a player way higher than expected just because it's like, man, we really need this position. And then I like where they spent the draft capital. So edge defender Miles Murphy, who, the Bengals said they had him in the top half of the 1st round. Other people did too. That's not egregious. Power rusher. Didn't really develop at Clemson into the guy that you expected, but he's a very good run defender and should be a solid pass rusher. At least if he provides Sam Hubbard-like production, which is good, solid, late 1st round type of production, I think that's a fair expectation. But he becomes insurance now for Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson, making all that money at edge, and Murphy becomes that cheaper option over the next couple of years because we got to deploy resources elsewhere. Same thing with DJ Turner. Do you need a starting corner this year? Not necessarily. Cam Taylor-Britt and Chidobe Awuzie are there, but Awuzie is in the last year of his contract. Turner can compete for time right away. Yeah, the model loves him, but he's incredibly athletic, was productive at Michigan. He has a chance to contribute right away, but also in the long term. Mm-hmm. Jordan Battle at safety. He's going to be one of the more fascinating prospects because the production's incredible and the workout's terrible. So we'll see what wins out there, but he's got a chance to play right away at safety as well and give you a cheaper option at an important position. And then, as you mentioned, the receivers, like if Charlie Jones he absolutely could take over for Tyler Boyd, who they won't be able to afford after this year. So I think it's a very good job of immediate needs without sacrificing value, but also future-proofing this roster that's going to have to deploy a ton of resources and make this roster really top-heavy.
As a general concept, would you be more willing to overlook crappy measurables from players out of blue blood programs in the SEC? Like he just played multiple years at Alabama, where you're going to get an idea if the lack of measurables is a problem or not. Like, obviously, ideally, you want elite measurables combined with elite tape. But if you're going to have a guy with terrible measurables, I would like at least to have the evidence that he's already been doing this at a high level in a very good conference going up against elite NFL players versus, my guy played for Eastern Michigan, where I don't really know if this is an issue yet because the players he's going up against and playing alongside are not very good either.
Yes, I'm more likely to do that. I think it also depends on the position. I think bad measurables are scary at corner. They are a little scary at safety. I think there's definitely some players, because safety is it's more of a football intelligence type of position than pure athleticism, being in the right place at the right time in the right spot. And it's a lot of usage pattern, right? Like, you don't want guys with bad measurables, either playing center field too often unless they're really good with their eyes and seeing the game. You don't want them one-on-one with receivers when you play quarters, because they're just going to get destroyed. So I think usage for battle is going to be important there. So, yeah, it's a good question, right? Like, where do you draw that line? The numbers I've looked at say I'm more willing to overlook bad production with great measurables at, say, corner, whereas safety, I think it's a little more hit or miss, because you have guys like an Adrian Amos who have had really good productive careers. He's not an outstanding athlete, but he's a very good football player. And there's a lot of hidden value in those types. All that said, like Jordan Battle going at round 3, pick 95, that's great. It's first-round tape with third-round movement skills, in my opinion, for Battle. So I'll take that in the third round all day.
Mm-hmm.
And then, Charlie Jones, Yusevich, chance to add to that receiving core and keep it strong. Yeah, the only question is, do they need to do something at right tackle? And we'll see if they...
Which, if Jonah Williams is the answer, you don't really. I mean,
Lyle Collins is still theoretically in the mix?
Yeah, like he'll come back.
I don't want to roll with Akeem Adeniji.
Yes. Lyle Collins will come back, but he tore 3 significant ligaments in his knee. That's problematic for anybody, let alone a guy with an injury history of the extent and length that his is. So, Jonah Williams being your starter at right tackle, hopefully he can play the same level he was playing left tackle before last year. And then Lyle Collins working his way back to try and be the backup there. That's fine. Like, no problem.
Yeah, the only places where you would say, okay, what else did they not address? Maybe a little bit more on the defensive line. Maybe a nose tackle. DJ Reader's he's in the last year of his contract. Bring somebody in there. But I also think the way the defensive tackle market is going, there's a bunch of guys in that $5 to $8 million range that you could bring in and kind of stitch it together there. So I think the Bengals are in good shape, and it was a good draft, like I said, for short, intermediate, long-term needs, like what the Bengals did. We gave them an A over at PFF.com.
There you go.
Cleveland Browns, a couple more teams to get through here. Browns did not pick until pick 74 in round 3, where they go Cedric Tillman, the wide receiver out of Tennessee, Siaki Ika, the defensive tackle out of Baylor, with their second, third-round pick. They get the falling DeJuan Jones, round 4, pick 111, the offensive tackle out of Ohio State. Isaiah McGuire, the edge out of Missouri, was their second, fourth-round pick. They go Dorian Thompson-Robinson, DTR, the QB out of UCLA in round 5, Cameron Mitchell, the cornerback out of Northwestern, and then center Luke Whippler out of Ohio State in round 6. This is the time, Sam, where we look at this draft and we say we love it, right? I love a lot of these players here, because if DeJuan Jones went late first, I wouldn't have been surprised. If Luke Whippler went in the second, I wouldn't have been surprised. If Ika went in the second, wouldn't have been surprised. So the Browns got all the guys that look like great value picks. They all fell. I know the caveat here, guys who usually fall, doesn't mean the hit rate's better. Guys
right.
Where perception was higher than reality for these guys. But I'm buying in to perception that the Browns may have stolen some really good starters here throughout the draft, despite not picking until pick 74.
Yeah, no, I think this is a good draft. Look, DeJuan Jones, I think he's at a crossroads now. Like, he went in the 4th round. We were talking about a guy who maybe should have gone in the 1st round based off his tape, based off how he dominated the first day at the Senior Bowl. But you have all the stuff Chris was talking about, I think on our show first, and then the day 1 of the draft show, where he's saying, look, he turned a lot of people off in the NFL with his attitude, with the way he bailed on the Senior Bowl after one good day of practice, essentially like in cricket. Like, I just declared on that score and then not going to risk making it worse over the next few days. Then how he handled his pro day. There was a report out yesterday that he was telling people the NBA was his first love. My dream is to play in the NBA. As the NFL people are wanting to hear nothing other than how much you love football and all that kind of stuff. I don't really care about that, but it's
ridiculous,
right? But when you add that to all the other stuff that, like, Chris was saying that he'd never heard like the venom that was being used by these NFL personnel guys to describe the attitude presented by DeJuan Jones, right? The point being, whatever this is, the totality of what's happened, it's potentially cost him 3 rounds worth of draft position, which comes with it 3 rounds worth of investment and buy-in from the team that's taking you. So DeJuan Jones is now at this crossroads where either he like buckles down and gets his shit together and is like, oh, I got to prove it now. I got chip on the shoulder. I got to show that I'm a first-round guy. I've got to get my career together because I almost cost myself the whole opportunity. Or we're on like a fast-track pathway to Isaiah Wilson, to Aaron Gibsoning his way out of the NFL. Like, I think that's where we are right now, and he goes one of 2 directions.
It's a great place to take that risk.
Yeah, absolutely. The 4th
round
round, 100%. I mean, genuinely, I think that guy has first-round talent. I think he could be the second best tackle in this draft. It wouldn't be crazy. So, yes, attitude concerns, whatever you want to characterize that as, to have that in the 4th round, it's 100% a kind of gamble I would take.
Okay, the more I listen to evaluators over and over again, and I may have put some funny words together when I was saying that yesterday. You hear evaluators talk about how much the players that they drafted love football. They all love football. And because I don't know if it's an edge around the NFL, if everybody's looking for the guys who love football, because it seems like 90% of them really love ball, right? They love it. So the guys who drop, it's not injuries, or it's probably just they don't love ball enough. Or the perception is that they don't, right? Like, that's why a guy like DeJuan Jones, like, the evaluator can't go to the podium and say, we drafted DeJuan Jones, he loves football.
Yeah, okay, so listen.
If they came to that conclusion.
Jones, who is 375 pounds at the combine, and then refuses to weigh in at his pro day, but is allegedly visibly heavier by up to 20 pounds, if you're listening to people, right? Now you have a guy where his actual motivation for this job is actually quite a relevant piece of information. If he doesn't really want to be good at this, which is being used like we're using this sort of interchangeably. Does he love football equals does he actually want to work hard at this job? For him, I think it's a much bigger question because now if he doesn't, is he just going to eat his way out of the league and we're going to be a 420-pound dude by week 3? And by week 12, we're like, this just doesn't work. I got to get rid of this guy. So it's always phrased in this stupid fashion of like, oh, he doesn't love football. But really what we're trying to answer here is, does he care enough to actually try and be good at this? Because if he doesn't, there's no point in me drafting him because it's not going to work.
I think that's really fair. I mean, I joke about it because I don't – with the way it's cited all the time is like every team feels like they've got this advantage.
Right.
Like, look, we've got we only draft people that are going to be Chicago Bears,
so,
Detroit Lions, or whatever. We're going to draft our guys, our character guys, but every team is literally doing that.
Right.
But
in isolation, the piece of information that DeJuan Jones, apparently his first dream was to play in the NBA, is irrelevant, it's stupid, it sounds ridiculous. But if teams are using that and saying, well, this is his fallback option, this is simply demonstrative of what else I'm seeing, that he doesn't actually want to do this, that this is not what he's going to work towards for the rest of his life, it's potentially a data point in this pattern of behavior that is leading teams to suspect that this guy is actually going to crap out of the league like very quickly and not realize this first round potential that he has.
Yeah, and so I'm good taking that risk in the 4th. Certainly worth taking that risk in the 4th, especially where who the heck knows on all those reports and all that stuff.
Yes.
So what does that even look like? I think there's a chance if he does have his head on straight and he's good, he could take over for Jedrick Wills at left tackle next year.
Yeah.
Or even compete for left tackle. I would compete him at, like, because you got Jack Conklin at right tackle. I think Conklin's going to be on the roster. I don't think they're getting rid of him.
Conklin's also had a long injury history.
He's had
himself.
injuries.
Like, I think if DeJuan Jones gets his stuff together, he's a viable option at either tackle spot in the future for the Browns.
So get him in the mix. If both tackles are healthy, get DeJuan Jones playing a little tight end right away. You get a little tight end. Yes.
Juwan Jones.
Well, just extra block is 6-man O-line. Blocking for Nick Chubb with Deshaun Watson in the backfield. We got some creativity here. I love it. I'm not letting him run routes or anything like that.
Oh, I thought that
but
was
he's a better blocker than Jordan Akins and David Njoku, who they have an actual tight end.
I now want to see him run a corner route in the end zone.
Yeah, I mean,
6'8", 375 pounds.
I'll teach you to not work out, run a corner. I'll see you move. We'll get some NGS time.
They'll use that as a way of getting him to do wind sprints without getting him to do wind sprints.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
So we're not going to punish you with extra cardio work. Having said that, we're going to install you in our tight end package where you're going to have to run a corner or a drag route across the back of the end zone. We'll practice that a few times during the week, you know?
So again, given what they had, let me just talk about Whippler really quick here. Round 6, production was outstanding for Whippler. I get the people who didn't love Whippler because he doesn't. I don't know if he plays guard at all. He might be a center only.
Right.
But Ethan Pozic, he's under contract there. But I think you've got at least a good backup center there, Whippler, who could take over as a starter in the future too. 3 years of good production at Ohio State, good hand usage and all that stuff. I think he could play in the league, and you get him in the 6th.
Yeah,
The lack of ability to play multiple positions is an issue when you only keep 8 guys active every week and all that stuff, but I think he's a starting center.
Right. That's the thing. It's not ideal, but the bottom line is you do need a center, and you also kind of need a backup at that spot. And if he's a starting caliber center, that's a valuable spot, even if you're taking him, even if you don't think he can play other positions.
Cedric Tillman, their first pick 74. Tillman, another guy that got rumors to go up as high as the 2nd and everything. Good outside receiver who has some work to do against press. But again, I think Keely Ringo dropped to the 4th round because he couldn't cover Cedric Tillman. I mean, I think that was a big part of the evaluation, right? I mean, Tillman was the star for Tennessee before he got hurt and Jalen Hyatt took over. So you had Tillman to this mix, big-bodied, physical guys, pretty good on slants, and you add him to Amari Cooper and Elijah Moore and Donovan Peoples-Jones and Marquise Goodwin. I think he's got a chance to contribute here as well.
Absolutely. I mean, I think he's a good receiver. In the 3rd round, absolute steal. What he is really good at, and Mike Renner talks about this a lot, is how suddenly can you stop? It's one thing to be going quickly in one direction, but what really separates a lot of these receivers is how quickly they can throttle it down and break off and go in a different direction after threatening something vertical. Tillman stops really suddenly. He can break off his routes in an instant. And for a guy 6'3", 200+ pounds, he does that really, really well. And we've been railing against this Tennessee offense, how difficult it is to project to the NFL. Tillman's role in that offense is the most applicable to the next level. We've seen a lot more NFL asks from him than we've seen from Jalen Hyatt or from Hendon Hooker. So I feel a lot better about projecting his role into the NFL than I did about either of those other 2 guys. I mean, I think in the 3rd round, that's incredible value.
Really quick, Siaki Ika, the nose tackle out of Baylor, there's a path to the field for him as well. The Browns have been terrible at defensive tackle for a while, and this is what's interesting about the Cowboys and Browns are 2 teams who have not solved their defensive tackle problem for multiple years, say. And the Cowboys used the round 1 pick on Mozzie Smith. I think Mozzie Smith's a better player than Ika from Baylor, but I don't know, is it that big of a difference? Now you've got Siaki Ika, 3rd round, pick 98. I think he has a chance to come in and be that big body up front. Pass rush production really tapered off last year, but I don't know if you need it a ton, especially from your 3rd rounder. He's going to come in. Dalvin Tomlinson is there. Steal some snaps from Jordan Elliott, who's just had a rough career so far after, we liked him a few years ago as well. But I think the Browns have really improved their defensive line with Ika in the 3rd, Isaiah McGuire, a little juice off the edge there to add to Myles Garrett, Okoronkwo, Alex Wright. So given the picks that they had, even Cameron Mitchell in the 5th, former teammate of Greg Newsome, the former 1st rounder for the Browns.
Yeah, I'd forgotten that they drafted Isaiah McGuire. I was actually talking about the Browns on radio this morning, and he slipped my mind that they'd added him as well.
I always forget Isaiah McGuire.
Always. Real power player, though, a guy that could combine with Okoronkwo and sort of be, the 2-down version to Okoronkwo's pass rush specialist on that side of the line. Obviously, Myles Garrett is like an every down guy, but he's got a lot of power, a ton of bull rushes in his tape. Part of that was the alignment at Missouri. They didn't get him into the kind of space to do an awful lot else, but he's got some pass rush moves as well. I think he can play inside in tighter spaces and let somebody play outside him, or he can be your guy that sets that hard edge against the run and gets on the field that way. So, they drafted Alex Wright last year, right, to try and be a bit of a project player. Didn't see a ton from him year one. Now they've added guys like Okoronkwo, and then Isaiah McGuire, I think, is another good addition to the ones they've got inside. They've really bolstered that defensive line, which needed it badly.
And then Dorian Thompson-Robinson, 12-year starter at UCLA, steps right in to compete for backup snaps at Cleveland.
Is he older than Deshaun Watson?
I think he backed up Cade McNown in the Rose Bowl back in '99 at UCLA. DTR, I need a name for these players, but Dorian Thompson-Robinson, you could put Brock Purdy in this bucket, you could put Kenny Pickett in this bucket, Sean Clifford, just these college quarterbacks who for the first 2, 3, 4 years of their career, Purdy's maybe not a good example. He's went the other way.
23, by the way.
He's only 23, huh? These guys that were just kind of like the enigmatic college quarterback, right? Oh, man, I've got DTR. I'm excited about him, but oh, no, he throws the bad interception at the wrong time. And then by their senior year, they're better. Like, look at those senior year numbers. Good touchdown interception ratio, completed almost 70% for a guy who had serious accuracy issues for a lot of his career. He did continue to get better at UCLA, and I know there's a lot of people that liked him. And my point is, it's like almost tough to say, like, there was no way this guy was a prospect 3 years ago, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
But they are better as seniors, and they've got all this experience, and
he's the classic.
It's intriguing in the fifth.
Yes.
For sure.
He's a classic player where I saw him earlier in his career, and you look at a guy and you're like, there is 0% chance that guy becomes a viable NFL player down the line. But then they get better. Now, sometimes you see those guys and you're sort of forever tainted by your first impression. That idea of you only get one first impression. Well, if your first impression is absolute trash, your brain is indelibly marked with the idea that guy cannot become an NFL player. He got a lot better throughout his college career. Now, I don't know that he ever got, good, Like, he got better from complete ass to, I see what you got. So if you came to his tape, last thing first, if the most recent stuff was what you started with, you're like, okay, I could see how this could work. But if you actually saw the progression, you're like, we got a lot better, but we still didn't exactly get really good here. And there's a massive gap, obviously, between him and the guys at the top of the draft. But in this world of the second, third tier of quarterbacks this year, none of them really have starting tools, potential. They just don't even have the things that you need to bring to the table. DTR at least has that. He's got the size, he's got the athleticism, he's got the arm. You can craft a world in your brain where he becomes a starting quarterback down the line. And as you say, that's absolutely worth the fifth-round pick.
I love it. I love the Browns draft. We gave it an A- over at PFF.com. I think, given what they had and having potential starters and contributors with almost every pick there, I think it's a huge win for the Browns.
Liked it. And an undrafted free agent they got that I think is worth mentioning, Lonnie Phelps, edge rusher from Kansas, who had been, where was he before Kansas? Louisville? Somewhere like that. Lonnie Phelps.
Productive career for him at edge.
206 on the consensus board, so shouldn't have slipped out of the draft. I liked his tape a lot. He reminded
me during the season. Yeah.
You what? Model
adjacent during the season. Yeah.
He reminded me of somebody from his sort of stance, and I could never quite put my finger on who it was. He has this really upright look. You can see it from that pic. He's got like a bolt upright back, and I don't know if it's just a long torso or this absurd, like he's the textbook posture guy. We see all those ads where it's like shoulders back, chest forwards, back in a straight line, the things that are supposed to create that, those posture improving devices. Lonnie Phelps has been using one of those since the age of 3 by the posture that he displays at all times. But he was good. He's disruptive. He makes a lot of plays. So I'm surprised he fell out of the draft entirely. I think he can be a player for them.
A- for the Browns plus Lonnie Phelps in free agency. Pretty good haul given what they brought into the draft. Let's wrap it up now. I think this is all. Pittsburgh Steelers. It's our last team. 32 of 32.
Beautiful.
For those people who say that we hate the Steelers. We loved the Steelers draft. Both of us did. I think everybody loved the Steelers draft.
Yeah.
Number one, they trade up a few spots to get Broderick Jones, the tackle out of Georgia, at pick 14. They get Joey Porter Jr. at cornerback. With the first pick of the second round, pick 32. Keanu Benton, the defensive tackle out of Wisconsin, is their second round pick. Tight end Darnell Washington falls all the way to pick 93 in round 3, the tight end out of Georgia. Love that pick given the value, the fall for Darnell Washington. Nick Herbig, one of my favorite players in the draft, round 4, pick 132. And then they don't pick again until round 7, where they pick up Corey Trice, who fell quite a bit, the cornerback out of Purdue.
Medicals, apparently.
Medicals. Spencer Anderson, the tackle out of Maryland, is their second, 7th round pick. So, look, it's easy to like drafts, once again, where big names seem to fall.
Yeah.
And there might be reasons why that happened. But overall, I think the Steelers did a great job of not only picking players where they should have, but definitely taking, whether there was a medical risk or whatever risk with Darnell Washington, with Corey Trice, all worthwhile gambles, much lower than they were expected to go.
Yeah. No, I love this draft. Washington is the interesting pick because, I mean, if you listen to this show before the draft, you would know that I'm not in love with Darnell Washington by any stretch. And it shocked me that he was being talked about as a potential first-rounder based off what he brings to the table. But at some point in the draft, once these tight ends were flying off the board and we were getting through the second round and blah, 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 it's like, all right, even by my standards, we've gone too far here. Like, again, we've overcorrected. I get that there are reasons to be concerned about Darnell Washington, but there's enough to like that he should be gone already. So to get him in the 3rd round, pick number 93, I think is a steal. Broderick Jones, a lot of people had him as their number 1 tackle in the draft. Pittsburgh picks him up, gets to absolutely upgrade one of the 2 tackle spots they have. And then Joey Porter Jr., obviously, you get the story of him, going to his dad's old team, Joey Porter Sr., the outside linebacker for Pittsburgh back in the day. It's a nice sort of symmetry there. But I also think Porter's a better player than people are giving him credit for. He's seen as the best press man corner in this draft. Perfect fit schematically going to Pittsburgh. They play a lot of press man, so that's good. B, I think he can be more than that. Like, I genuinely think he has a lot more skills in zone coverage, or at least the ability to be really good in zone coverage once you iron out a couple of sort of kinks in his game. Joey Porter at pick number 32 is a steal.
Yeah, Omar Khan is his first full draft as the GM with the Steelers, his first full offseason as GM with the Steelers. And I think Pittsburgh came into the draft without a ton of needs. Look, it's easy to get caught up in either big name signings or big names who fall in the draft. And I don't know if all of them are going to work out for the Steelers.
Of course not.
Trading for Allen Robinson, right? But we talk a lot about swinging for the fences and the ceiling and all that stuff. It's a high ceiling draft for the Steelers because of all of this, right? Including, that's on top of trading a 7th for Allen Robinson.
Right.
Bringing Allen Robinson into the mix to be with George Pickens and Deontay Johnson and Calvin Austin III, you're doing well by your quarterback. You're doing well by Kenny Pickett, who showed some flashes last year, but you want to up the production, the red zone production, and the actual points that you're putting on the board in Pittsburgh. You add Darnell Washington to Pat Freiermuth, who's already becoming one of the better all-around tight ends, and Washington can be your 2 and be a run-blocking tight end who's just going to create some mismatches here and there. How about that red zone package with Darnell Washington and George Pickens and Allen Robinson, the potential there. So I just like the way the team is being put together.
Yeah.
And it's tough for me to say because it's in our contract that we're not supposed to say nice things about the Steelers. It's a PFF axiom that you can't say nice things about the Steelers.
You're actually getting fined for this show?
Yeah, I'm willing to eat the fine because I like the way the Steelers are building their team.
Mm-hmm.
I'm with you on the Joey Porter Jr. thing. And again, he doesn't have to step in and start. He probably competes to start, with Ahkello Witherspoon. He probably, the Steelers probably want him to take over for Witherspoon. We bring in Patrick Peterson, and it's a decent group for this year and for the future.
Did you see the little pep talk that Joey Porter Sr. was giving him?
No.
As he was sliding out of the first round, he was basically talking about how we're going to use this. There's going to be chip on the shoulder material.
Yeah.
And he was like, you did nothing wrong. Like, this is just the way the draft goes sometimes. And blah. It was good little thing. You can Google and find the little talk. It's funny. Like,
we need to analyze all the guys who've had chips on their shoulders historically, and if that translates to production.
It is very easy sometimes to commodify players and just sort of treat them as abstracts and just pieces, right? But you do get not so much at the draft because the networks aren't actually great at this at the time. It's just
they try to exploit the stories by staring at Will Levis the whole time in the green room.
Well, they try and exploit,
looking at his sad face. That's the network make it into a much bigger story than it should be.
Right. They try and exploit the story, and they don't bring you any depth to it. It's just like, here's the living room scene of this player, and everybody's happy. It's like, all right, yeah, fine, but it's only after the draft where you start to see the little videos of, the little moments or the little things that are said that humanize the whole thing. You know? So you've got Joey Porter Sr. giving Joey Porter Jr. the pep talk. You've got Quentin Johnston, who, as a player, we've been reasonably negative about overall, but Johnston getting this moment of saying, his mother's going to retire tomorrow. Like, I don't want you working again. I just hit the jackpot for all of us. Like, this is like, that's what there's a humanizing thing that gets lost along the way that is nice to like reconnect with after the draft, with all these little moments that you see, and even players that you didn't like as players, as on-field commodities. They're people that just had their dream fulfilled this day.
Oh yeah, I mean, we should definitely appreciate that a little bit more maybe than we do.
Yeah, which is nice to see, even if it's a player that you don't think is that great, or a player that you don't think is going to work out down the line. Like, that's a dude who
honestly, though,
has been working for this for his entire life and just hit the jackpot.
Again, as much as we joke about the model and numbers and all that stuff, that is why evaluators, that's why I could get behind Brad Holmes being like, Jahmyr Gibbs and Jack Campbell are our guys. Like, we love them so much. We believe in the people, and we want to work with those people, right? You're choosing the people that you're going to work with for the next 4 or 5 years. You and I have had some co-workers that we like and don't like, right? Maybe you don't. I
mean, everybody has.
Right? Everybody has. So you get to choose the people that you're working with. So you have to consider all of that stuff. Also, I can relate, Sam. When I went undrafted, I was very sad, and I went for a ride by myself and was like, man, what's going on?
3 times, right?
Yeah, the first time, I mean, in high school, I wasn't expecting to get drafted, but yeah, got passed up 4,500 times.
Yeah.
That hurt.
That's a lot of rejection.
A lot of rejection. But I used it for good. Chip on my shoulder.
Exactly.
I had the chip, and now I just eat all the chips.
Yeah, but it's also,
used it.
It also makes it easy to understand why it's difficult sometimes for teams to, stick to the script, stick to what's supposed to be the correct way of doing it, right? Because they do sit down with these guys. You start to like people. It's only natural. Like you said, everyone's been around people they didn't like or liked. You've also been around people that you liked within 5 minutes of meeting them, and people that you hated within 5 minutes of meeting them. So when you sit down with all these prospects, when you bring these guys into your building, there are going to be guys you like right away, and you're like, man, I want to draft that guy. That guy's great. But the data is saying no. Your heart is saying, this guy, I love this dude, want to make his dream come true, want him to play for my team. But every piece of your data is saying, there's another guy over here who you don't like as much, is 10 times better.
I don't know how I would handle that if I was in the
isn't that the problem? Like, that's
in the
where
assistant GM seat, or if I was in one of those seats where we're all the brain trust is making decisions. I don't know how I would handle that. Like, this guy's a blue,
right?
But he's
And it's really easy to do from our seat where you don't have that connection with these people, and you're saying, how can you overlook what all the data is saying? Because you haven't had that. Like the scene in Moneyball, right, where he's like, why does Billy Bean or whatever his name is not travel on the plane with the players? It's like, he doesn't want to, he's got to cut these guys like tomorrow. He can't have that connection with them. It's got to be real. Like, that's got to be a problem.
Yeah. Just to circle back to the Steelers again, Keanu Benton, the second-round pick out of Wisconsin, very interesting profile. If you see some of the highlights, if you've surfed Twitter or just, watched him play, unbelievable get off on the, off the ball, penetrates into the backfield. He does a lot of good stuff. Disruptive type of player. I think he's got a lot of pass rush potential. His run defense profile is not great. I mentioned yesterday's show, maybe it was Brian Brzee, 2 guys who had really good pass rush grades, not so great run defense grades. Benton's kind of in that bucket. But I like that in the second if you're going to use him right. I don't think you're getting this point of attack, nose tackle type, but you're getting maybe an interior pass rusher to complement Cameron Hayward and the edge rushers that they have in Pittsburgh. That's gonna pay off. And then Nick Herbig, the edge/linebacker, I really like a lot.
You think he moves to off-the-ball linebacker like full-time?
I think the NFL probably wanted him to. He is. I mean, so we've got this history of Wisconsin players doing that, right? With Joe Schobert, Zach Bond.
It's actually a weird run.
It is.
How do you find that many tweener-type edge rushers?
Those guys are pure edge rushers in college who became linebackers at the NFL, but Bond's done a little bit of hybrid stuff. Herbig, I think, can do a little hybrid stuff. When he played in space, he kind of moves well. He plays zone coverage pretty well. And I know the Steelers brought in Cole Holcomb and Landon Roberts to play linebacker. Like, I'd give Herbig a shot to compete with those jobs. And then, be a blitzer on third down to go with TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith and everything they have there. So I like Herbig. I think he's just a good – I talked to Renner about him. I'm like, man, is Herbig the best linebacker in this class? I was that excited about him, maybe other than Jack Campbell. And Renner's like, I don't know, but I just think he's going to be good.
Yeah.
I don't know what he's going to do, but I think he's going to be good. So love the Steelers draft. We gave it an A+, one of the few A+s around the PFF draft grades over at PFF.com.
Mm-hmm.
Is that it?
I think it might be.
Did we give all 32 teams proper love?
Well, I mean, who's to determine what's proper?
What do we talk about for the next 4 months?
It's up to you guys. NFL podcast at PFF.com. Let us know what the hell we should be talking about for the next couple of months. Well,
we had some fun shows last year. Austin Gale, rest in peace. You guys did a huge show last year. I would always do the one reason for optimism for every team. And it was like, yeah, pretty good numbers. And then you guys would come in and be like, one reason for pessimism for every NFL team. And the thing crushed, doubled up my optimism show.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll get to that at some point.
Yeah, negativity. Well, I'm sure we'll get to some negativity.
We'll get to some great negativity.
Yeah, there's also some bits of news that have happened over this week. We'll talk about those tomorrow, right? The last show of the week.
Tomorrow we're going to talk fifth-year options around the league. Jordan Love's QB contract.
Signing of Donovan Smith.
Donovan Smith going to the Chiefs, and we'll talk left tackle, right tackle, and their value, and all sorts of good stuff. We could talk nerdy things too. And then also let us know if you want us to rewatch an old draft.
Oh, God.
Like the 1 hour condensed first round version, and we'll watch.
There's got to be something better we can watch than a draft from 2006.
But it's all the same stuff we like. The team building. What were they thinking? Why'd they draft? Whoever. Would they pass up?
I think this falls into the category of late '90s Jag show.
No, this is way better
interest.
than that. It's way better than that. Old drafts are fun. What else could we watch with you?
I don't know. Again,
a live watch along.
NFL podcast at PFF.com.
I'm telling you, I know that the Jags late '90s show would not do well. That's why I would not push it.
That's good.
Other than a segment, I think this would cook. I think an old draft review of 05 or 08 or whatever year would cook. Let us know if that would cook. Also, hit the thumbs up. Let's go, and let us know about future guests. Yeah. Do we get Greg Rosenthal back? Do we get Rick Spielman back?
Do all of our work for us.
Yeah, do all the stuff for us.
Just plan this whole show out.
No, it's your show. It's the people's show.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Yeah, no, it's good.
You guys make this show. You guys make it all happen. So we appreciate everybody. We appreciate everybody for watching all of our draft stuff. Our recap show after the draft is doing well.
Yeah, it's doing crazy well. The numbers we got in that thing, when you consider we started it at like, half 12, 1, whatever the hell time it was, is crazy. The number of people that still wanted to watch and get analysis on the draft that had just happened at 1 a.m. in the morning is crazy.
So, we appreciate everybody. Go listen to the previous draft reviews. And then, Sam and I will be back tomorrow catching up on all the post-draft NFL news. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. We'll see you tomorrow.